Alright, welcome back. I'm at the forest we're trying to buy at the moment. And today I just wanted to share a bit of our plans for the forest for once we've made the purchase. So we've really got three things that we want to do in this forest. Firstly, it's to transition to continuous cover forestry, otherwise known as closer to nature forestry. So that's where we are going to have trees of different ages in the forest, and the older trees we'll cut down every so often, and that leaves all the smaller and younger trees still there, so it still gives the impression and the flavour of what the forest is about, rather than these clear fell sites where you'll just go and cut everything down at once. Everything's the same age, you just cut everything down, and really that's not so good for biodiversity and amenity value. So we want to convert to continuous cover forestry. So how does that actually work? So let me go along a bit more here. So you can see we've got some coniferous trees here. So the coniferous trees on this site are the ones which are the ones that can have timber value and that will manage more in a continuous cover forest method. So in a site like this, we'll basically cut fairly large rides or clearings into this, and that will get light down to the forest floor, and then more trees hopefully will start to grow at a different age to the ones nearby. I mean, it might not be rides, it might be more small clearings, so we'll make clearings. That's probably how we'd like to do it more. And that will basically mean that these trees that we leave, they will continue growing, and they'll be the first timber crop, and then these ones which are growing up in the clearings in between, they'll be the timber crop, you know, 15-20 years after that. And these trees are about 15 years old, and this is probably, we wouldn't really want to leave it any longer than this to do it, because if these trees get too big and then you're cutting clearings in, then the risk of wind damage, so where the wind will just come in and just blow the trees over, is a lot higher. And it might still happen here. That's one of the risks with trying to do continuous cover forestry, especially when it hasn't been planned as that from the start. And the other risk here is that some of the coniferous sections, not this bit specifically, but in other places there's quite a bit of water, and if you've got a lot of water and the trees are growing in more water, then the likelihood of wind damage is also high. It's just a bit more unstable. Right, so that's a little bit about the type of forestry we're hoping to do. The next point is we really want to get more people involved in ownership of forests. So the idea is that the forest here would be held in a limited company, and that we would then sell shares in that limited company. So people would become shareholders in the forest. So technically you'd own a bit of the forest, but you don't have any responsibilities. Of course, we'd like people to get involved, but there'd be no commitment to get involved. And the reason for doing that is having lots of shareholders in, it means instead of people owning lots of little bits of forest themselves, when you own it together, you get that kind of scale and that economy of scale in the management of it. Because really the forest we've got here is probably just about big enough to manage economically for timber, whereas anything smaller would be, it's just unless you're doing the work yourself, and even then it's just not, you don't really get that scale to really make a worthwhile financial return. And the third thing, which links into both the previous terms, is we want to do something called hutting. So hutting is basically the small off-grid cabins in the forest used for just recreational purposes, so just for weekends or short holidays, and that people own their own huts. So someone would lease the hut site from us, they would build their hut, and then they maintain it. So they have a long-term lease in place, and they're responsible. And you can't rent the huts out, but you can have family and friends come over and use the hut. And the forest owners we'd get a lease fee for that. So it's fairly small in the grand scheme of things, but if we have a number of huts, that provides a nice yearly income, to help us manage the continuous cover forestry we're trying to establish, because it's going to be quite costly to get that established, and there's more financial risk, you know. Like I said, I mean, the trees, we might go in and cut these rides and these clearings, but then the trees might blow over, and you kind of, that's a lot of value you've just lost. So having that secondary source of income helps to de-risk it and mean that we can actually hopefully do more continuous cover forests and expand. So that's kind of the basics, and really of course we hope that the people who have huts will also be shareholders in the company as well. I think maybe we'd even make it necessary for that, but it depends. We need to still go through and work out how it's all going to work from a financial regulation point of view, because that's a big thing that's kind of been holding us up, that it's classed as an investment, because hopefully the hope is that you'll make a financial return, and that's what, you know, we're putting our own money in, so that's what we're hoping as well. It's not going to be a huge return, but it's hopefully enough to make it worthwhile, and hopefully in the future more people would get involved. And you know, it's really, it's supposed to be about making a financial return, but also making a positive difference, both really in terms of our environment, creating more of these continuous cover forests, which we believe is a lot more beneficial for those biodiversity, wildlife and amenity purposes, and it just looks nicer in the landscape as well. So that's kind of a bit of a brief overview of our plans, and hopefully we can share more about the exact location and show some maps and stuff like that when we've completed the purchase, hopefully in about a month's time. But yeah, just keep following along, and I'll catch you in the next video.